Hello and welcome to Truth Media TV. And in this video, we're discussing a significant issue in Jamaica right now, which is this labor shortage. The private sector organization of Jamaica, or businesses in the private sector rather, are urging the Jamaican government to allow them to bring in workers from overseas because they're claiming that there is a labor shortage in the country. However, I believe that the real issue is not a shortage of people to work, but rather an unwillingness on the part of these private sector companies to pay Jamaicans a fair wage. So, if this sounds like something that you're interested in, then continue to listen right as I look at the dynamics of this labor shortage claim and the broader implications that this may have on the Jamaican people. I'm also going to be talking about why the private sector elites are willing to import workers rather than improving the working conditions and wages of Jamaican workers. So let's get to the bottom of this work issue. Some CEOs in the private sector are saying that there is not enough people to do the work that they have available. But is this hiding the real problem of the private sector, which instead of fixing the main issue, they want to bring in workers from overseas? And, this is something that we need to look at further. The fact is, Jamaica actually has many talented people who are willing and ready to work these jobs that they claim that are available. The real problem is that these workers struggle because their pay is not enough to cover the cost of living. So it's not that there aren't enough people to work, it's that there is not enough pay for these people to be willing to accept these jobs. So let's look at the historical trend. When we look at Jamaica's history, it's not extensive, right? We realize that there's a common issue or a common theme that keeps emerging. Like when the government hired nurses and doctors from Cuba, even though we had skilled people here in Jamaica who were ready to do these nursing and doctor jobs, but the problem was that the pay was not enough. So these persons had to look overseas for jobs. Now, when we understand this aspect of Jamaica's history, we see where elements of colonialism and the impact of colonialism seeps into the Jamaican landscape. The idea to bring in workers from overseas often comes from these rich people, if you will, and these are the same people whose families were once slave owners in most cases, right? These are the same people who are paying Jamaicans slave wages while working in slave-like conditions. So the real problem that the private sector has is that Jamaicans are no longer willing to work for slave wages, and they want to punish us by threatening to import foreign workers. Now, while we're talking about bringing in foreign workers, there is no regard for how this will impact the local workforce or the bigger impact that it will have on the Jamaican society and the economy as a whole. Now, Jamaica is a developing country with a very high cost of living. And for us to handle things like healthcare, housing, and nutritious food, we need pay that matches how expensive it is to live here in this country. Sadly, many of us Jamaicans, our paychecks really cannot cover our basic needs. So naturally, it is a cause for concern when we hear the private sector asking the government to allow them to import workers from overseas. Some might think that this is an attempt to get cheaper labor for skilled jobs, but is it really? We must also consider how this will affect us as a country. Will Jamaica be a country that prioritizes the welfare of Jamaicans, or will it turn into a place that cares more about foreigners? The idea of bringing in workers overseas, in my view, is a deliberate attempt by private sector employers who are largely descendants of colonial powers to scare Jamaican people into accepting unfair working conditions and low wages. The uncomfortable truth is that these so-called quote-unquote elites are the bourgeoisie don't like the idea of treating Jamaicans fairly, even though we are just asking for reasonable pay increases. We're still dealing with the fallout from the 2020 pandemic. Everybody knows this. Many businesses freeze wages, and some workers, especially those in the hotel industry, had to take massive pay cuts, some of them more than even 50%. And things got more expensive. For example, in 2020, inflation went up by 5.2%, and this is according to the Bank of Jamaica, and then 5.9% in 2021, and a whopping 10.4% in 2022. And right now, they're looking that by the end of 2023, inflation would have been about 6 to 7%. So from 2020 to 2023, the overall increase in prices is about 27.5% on average, and this is in the cost of living. And it has been 4 years since many of us has gotten a raise. So these rich people see us as the working class, and behind the scenes, they are like the puppeteers pulling the strings of the politicians that they have bought and paid for. They are selling this story that Jamaica has a labor shortage, but the fact is they are not interested in improving the lives of Jamaicans. Instead, they'd rather bring in workers from other countries and pay them way more for the same jobs than giving Jamaicans a fair pay that they deserve. A critical question therefore arises. Is the problem really a shortage of labor? Or is it that the private sector is unwilling to pay Jamaicans a fair wage? Another critical consideration is whether workers arriving from overseas will receive higher pay for the same jobs compared to what Jamaicans are earning. Then we have to ask, should we spend money on teaching and training local folks for these jobs, or is it more economically beneficial to bring in workers from other countries? There is more that is going on here than it seems. I think this is another Hegelian dialectic. The private sector creates the problem, gets a reactions from the people or the government, and then proposes a solution. The private sector either wants to make Jamaicans poorer by using foreign workers, or keep wages low despite the cost of living going up between 2020 and 2023. Neither of these options is good for Jamaicans. Because of this problem, Jamaicans are trying to find other ways to meet their basic needs. And in response, the private sector organization says there aren't enough workers, even though they are the ones that created the problem in the first place. They say the solution is to bring in foreign workers. This causes two things. One, Jamaicans are forced to accept poor working conditions because they are scared of losing their jobs, so the private sector can continue to pay them low wages. Oh, no, see the chap. And two, with the government's permission, the private sector can replace Jamaican workers with foreign workers on purpose, which will make the country even poorer. The idea, this whole thing turns into a cycle where the private sector does something, the workers react, and then the private sector suggests a solution that made things worse or stays the same. The idea of bringing foreign workers is a deliberate attempt by the PSOJ to put Jamaicans in their place. They have us working for them for pennies on the dollar since we are their slaves in their minds. And at the end of the day, there is no real labor shortage. And they don't really want to bring in people from other countries because that is going to cost them more. The only thing that they want is to scare us into accepting the low pay that they're offering by threatening to bring in workers from other countries. The question that needs to be answered is whether or not we are going to let them get away with it. Thank you for listening.